Okay? So the graph opens up, right? And it crosses with a positive slope, so I'm guessing it's something like this.
Yep.
Right? Okay, how many x-intercepts are there? 2. Now we know whenever I say intercepts, it's either crossing the horizontal or the vertical, right? So since there's 2 x-intercepts, that means the x-intercepts are those 2 spots, right? Crossing the horizontal line. So the question is, when y equals 2x squared plus 3x minus 5, at the x-intercept, what is the y value? 0. Okay? So at the x-intercept, y equals 0. Now that is always the case. Okay? Whether we're in expanded form like this, or factored form like you did on some of your work that was due yesterday, all right? Whenever you're trying to find your x-intercept, y equals 0. That's how you find it. Plug in 0 for y, then you can find your x-intercepts. That's why m and n are the x-intercepts. All right? We'll get more into that later on today. All right? So are there any questions about this? What? That's all you write for that first little question. Okay? Next question says, to find the x values for the x-intercept, we could solve the equation. What equation can we solve to find the x values of the y-intercept, or of the x-intercepts? What'd you say, Lon? Y equals, but what do I plug in for y? 0, good. This has 2 unknowns, so I can't solve this, but if I plug in 0 for y, we get this. Right? If I solve that equation for x, then I'll have the x-intercepts, right? Right? Does that make sense, guys? Does that make sense? How many solutions does this have? 2. How do you know there's 2, Lon? You're guessing? Faith, what is it? Perfect. Bruno, you're right, too. There's 2 x-intercepts. So that's how we know there's 2 solutions. Now some of you are saying, whoa, I need to solve an equation that has 2 solutions? Equations only have 1 solution, right? Not every equation. This equation has 2. It's possible 3. All right. So this one has 2 solutions. Think we need to find them both?
Yep.
Yep, we need to find them both. Okay. The number of solutions to this equation is equal to the x-intercepts. So this one has 2 solutions because of the x-intercepts. Okay. Does that make sense, guys? Does that make sense? Yeah. So we have the second question answered. To find the x values for the x-intercepts, we could solve the equation. Now if we know there's 2 solutions. So you have this part filled in right here, right? Yeah. Right? You're right where I just wrote there. 0 equals 2x squared plus 3x minus 5. And there's 2 solutions. Okay. So next we're going to do a bunch of work in this big open space in the middle of our page. Okay. So 0 equals 2x squared plus 3x minus 5. How am I going to solve this? What'd you say, Whitney? Factoring! Yeah, I did. I'm sorry. I get excited. Okay. Factoring is how we're going to solve it. So all the stuff we've been working on, guess what we're using it for? To find x-intercepts. So now this becomes just like what we did before we started factoring, right? Get to the M and N version, right? You guys remember the M and N version? No? Okay. Well, if I give this back into its factored form, I can find my x-intercepts. All right, so let's factor this. What do I got to do? Now A and B. A and C. Remember my A is 2, B is 3, C is -5, right? So we multiply A and C. So 2 times -5, which is? -10. Factors of -10 to add to 3. Anybody know it? -2 and 5. Nice job, Jessica. Man, you must be good at factoring. Yep. Not really. You just got that one pretty quick. Okay. So -2 and 5 are the factors of -10. Does that make sense, guys? Yeah. Okay. So that means I can rewrite this as 0 equals 2x squared minus 2x plus 5x minus 5, right? Right, does that make sense? Yeah, are there any questions? No questions? We good? We good? Yep, put it in the box. We get our gloves in our trunks, we box. Come on, that was a little joke. Still get crickets. No one wants an A, I guess. There, thank you. Everyone gets an A. All right. China gets an A too. She laughed a little bit. All right. Now, what do I do now? I'm boxing, right? GCFs now, right? What's the GCF on the top row? 2x. GCF in the bottom row? 5. GCF on the top? X, good. GCF here? -1. And I have to use negative because that's negative. Does that make sense, guys? Yeah? Are there any questions? Okay, let's check our work real quick. 2x squared, -2x, 5x, -5. Works out, doesn't it? We're good? Okay. So that means that 0 equals 2x squared. Oh, not 2x squared. What am I doing? Oh, what am I doing? Okay. 0 equals these factors, right? 2x plus 5 and x minus 1. Right? Now we're in our M and N form, aren't we? Remember? Right? So this is M, that's N. Now you guys got in the habit of just switching the signs, didn't you? But what you were really doing was a two-step algebra problem. When you switch the signs, you're really doing an algebra problem. I know, sneaky Mr. Branch. Okay? Made you do algebra without you knowing it. Okay? The reason why you're doing algebra not knowing it is because you were finding the value of x that made the factor 0. Right? Jamira, if I want this whole thing on the right side to be 0, right? That means one of these binomials has to equal what? Thank you, Jamira. Jamira? 0! One of the binomials has to equal 0, right? Well, what value can I plug in for x to make this 0? 1. If I put a 1 here, that's 0, isn't it? And the 1 is when you switch to -1. You guys see? You did algebra without knowing. Okay. What you just did in your head was you were seeing, you put in a number here for 1 that made the whole thing equal 0. Right? Does that make sense? So doing algebra here, and I know this is the more difficult way, but it's easier when I get to this one, and I'll show you that in a second. Okay? How do I solve this using algebra? You don't plug anything in. We get subtraction. What's the absolute subtraction? Addition. So we add 1. Add 1 to both sides. What does x equal? 1. Jamira, can you see that? Yeah. So x equals 1. Does that make sense? So that is 1 of my x-intercepts. We said there's 2. Right? How do I find the other one? Do the same thing with the other one. Good. So it's the same thing we've been doing with just a little further step. Okay? Now, if you were to use that old M and N switch sign business here, you would say that x needs to be what? -5. But what we're not accounting for in that M and N switch and sign business is that this x is a coefficient. Okay? So -5 won't work because 2 times -5 is -10. -10 plus 5 is -5. It doesn't equal 0. Right? So instead of trying to just plug numbers in my head, which you guys can do if you want to, instead of just trying to plug numbers into my head, we're going to use algebra, right? Some of you guys call it that A word, right? That bad thing. Right? No? No? Okay. Algebra. So how do I solve this? Subtract 5, good. Subtract 5 from both sides. -5 equals 2x. Now what? Divide by what? 2. Thank you. They said divide by -5. I must have been hearing things. Okay. 2's cancel out. So x is -5/2, right? What does that equal? -2.5. So that means our x-intercepts, our x is 1, and x is -2.5. Does that make sense? Does that make sense, guys? Yeah? It's the same thing we've been doing, right? But now we're just taking how many steps further? Just 1 step further. Is that something we can do? It's a lot of steps. But don't you feel accomplished? What? It seems easier? That's because you guys are really good at factoring. The better you are at factoring, the easier this problem is. It's confusing? Right, but this is why we need to set these equal to 0, because this is like our m, but because this has a 2 on it, then our m is really half of it. Okay, does that make sense? So it's very similar to the m and the n, but you were doing this with the m and the n, you just didn't know it yet. Yeah, you can just do that, that's fine. You can forget the whole m and stuff now if you don't want to. Yeah. Okay. Just set the factors equal to 0. All right?
No, you can't forget it because
the factoring part, definitely. The m and the n part, maybe not. All right. So, what's this point then? What's the x value here? 1. What's the x value here? Okay. And there you find the x-intercepts. Yes?
Is this going to be on the test?
Yes.
But can't you just do like
the table, like I do.
see autograph?
You can, but then make sure you draw me a graph and show things that way. Okay. Unless I specifically say you need to solve by factoring. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. Now, what's this value right here? Does anybody know? Nope. Y-intercept. What's my y-intercept for this equation? -5. Good. Have x be 0. So that point is -5. Okay. Are there any questions? Any questions? Okay, real quick, the next thing is a check. Okay? I want to check to make sure I'm right. So I'm saying that this should be 1 and that should be 2.5, right? So that means if I plug in 1 to this equation, what should y equal? 0. If I plug in -2.5 to this equation, what should y equal? 0. So let's try it out. So 2 times 1 squared plus 3 times 1 minus 5. You type that all in your calculator. Okay? I'll give you a moment to catch up. Maybe mustard it too. Ketchup, mustard, you get it? Come on, these jokes are good! Tough room, man. I wasn't really sick the past 2 days. I was at comedy class.
I figured.
So what does this equal? 0! Right? Let's try the other one. Now make sure you use parentheses around the -2.5 and put the squared outside of it. Otherwise, you'll make me look silly. Because if you don't put in parentheses and put the squared outside, it won't work out. Okay? Because the order matters. What do we get? 0! And you guys are smart. Any questions? Does that make sense? Just because I love math so much, let's try one more. Because math is so much fun. So you want to have more homework then?
No.
No, because the more I do, the less homework you guys have. So on the back, example 19, number 8. Now you're saying example 19, what? Well, it's for the whole unit. Okay. So there is our equation, right? Now we want to find the x-intercepts. So if I want to find the x-intercepts, what do I know right away? Y is what long? 0. So 0 equals -x squared plus x plus 12. Right? What's my next step? Factor! Wonderful. I get excited about factoring, sorry. Factoring is fun. It's alliteration. That's what will be true. A. What's A? -1. Good. What's B? 1. What's C? 12. Okay, so now we do A times C, right? Long, you were just complaining about how this is too many steps to remember. And you're like, you're waiting for me because you know these so well. Okay? Still takes a long time. I understand that. All right. So what are the factors of -12 that add to 1? -3, 4. Good job, Bruno. -3, 4. Does that make sense, guys? Yeah? If you've been keeping up with your homework, then hopefully this factoring stuff is really easy. Right? And this factoring stuff is still easy. I don't get it long. You must have found a loophole in my system. Rewrite it correctly. Okay. Now what do we do, Justin? Golf some gloves or shorts, mouthpiece, referee, ropes, and a square. Come on now. Boxing. Well, that's UFC, it's a little different. Okay, so now we plug our numbers in, right? Negative x squared minus 3x, 4x, and 12. Right? Now you might notice this is something we haven't seen before. Okay? Or maybe something we have seen, but we really haven't talked about that much. I have a negative sign right here, don't I? So what do we do? Some of you are panicking. Some of you aren't. No one's panicking? There's no panic? Oh, so this is a negative 1x. You guys are smart. Okay. What about here? 4. No one panicked. Wow. I panicked. What about here? No! This doesn't have a negative, does it? This doesn't have a negative, does it? Okay, so it's just x. The GCF here is just x, right? See how these both share the negative? So my GCF here is negative, right? The GCF here is just x because there's no negative on that 4. Okay, what about the 3 to 12?
It's just 3.
Okay, what is it? It's just 3. Okay. Now, no, you're doing it wrong. Because remember earlier in the year, or earlier when we were working on this, I said if that one's negative, this one has to be negative? Yeah. Right? That was when this was positive. But since this is a negative 1, it kind of messes everything up. Right? This is where the check helps us out. The 3 and this have to multiply to negative 3, don't they? So if this is negative 3, 3 times negative 1 makes negative 3, right? If I have negative 3 times negative 1, that makes positive 3 and a negative 12. If I have 3 times 4, I get 12. Does that make sense? You see how it's a puzzle, it all kind of goes together? Does anybody play Sudoku?
Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, right? What I do here, if I make this negative, that affects this down here, doesn't it? So if this is 12 and that's positive 4, that means this has to be positive 3. Okay, does that make sense, guys? You kind of got to do that part in your mind a little bit. All right? All right?
All right.
Yeah, you guys got that one? Kind of a tricky one. Okay, just want to make sure, I'm sorry. Okay, so now I know that 0 equals x plus 3 and negative x plus 4, right? So then I can find our intercepts. Okay? Now I know Long's thinking, oh, m is 3, or m is negative 3, n is negative 4, all done. Right, Long? No? Are some of you thinking that? No? Good. This negative x affects, oh, it rhymes. Negative x affects. This negative x affects the intercept, doesn't it?
But that one's still negative.
Yeah, this one's still negative 3, but this one's changed. So we need to do the algebra. So we do 0 equals x plus 3, and 0 equals negative x plus 4. Right? Set those to equal to 0, because if either of those factors is 0, the whole equation is 0. Does that make sense? Okay, so what do I do now? Subtract 3. So negative 3 is one of our x-intercepts. Right? You can do that when you have, that's fine. What do I do here? Subtract 4. So then now I have negative 4 equals negative x, right? Divide them both by negative 1. Or realize that I have a negative sign on both sides, right? So I can just write it as positive. So that means this parabola crosses the x-axis at negative 3 and 4. Right? Does that make sense, guys? So what does this parabola look like? We don't cross at negative 3 and 4, right? Right? Does it open up?
Rainbow.
Opens down. Rainbow. How do I know? Infinite math now. Just joking. A is negative. A is negative, we open down. A is positive, we open up. I'm glad you're